you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Terror Talk. Today, we're going to talk about inmate porters. You know, a lot of people believe that you can give these porters some level of trust. Some have even called these porters trustees. And to be honest with you, as Connie said in the video that I messed up on, that you cannot trust them. And we'll hear about that when we introduce Connie. But guys, this is going to be a great show. I don't think I've ever covered this before, so it's going to be interesting. Russ can't make it today, but he did give us a video, so I'm going to show the video when we come back from our break, and then we'll go ahead and have our discussion. Part of the discussions we're going to talk about is, you know, how porters can take advantage of staff that become too trusting. And also, I want to talk about, you know, if you're in a position where you have to filter which inmates could be the best porters, because by the way, guys, we don't get the best of resumes. Maybe we can give some tips that can help us make sure we pick the porters that are least likely to do something foolish. Least likely. Nothing's 100%. And I promise you, as we discuss why we would pick them, we'll explain why. So put a little strategy behind that. So we're not just covering unit porters, or if you want to call them orderlies or trustees, you know, also hospital porters, you know, maybe people that are assigned to clean an outside area, basically inmates that are assigned to help staff at some point. I just want to make sure that we realize that we're not obligated to these inmates. Or because they're helping us, we're not obligated, and they can be replaced. Now, of course, we have two guests on today. Connie, author Connie, The Cage Was Her Cocoon. Great book. If you guys get a chance, it's now available on Amazon. Connie will also be signing some copies. Connie, how's the book going? And then, well, introduce yourself first, and then tell. Yeah, you got it. You know this by now.
We have done so many videos now, Anthony. All right, so Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall. And now I am the published author for The Cage Was Her Cocoon. I am having such a great time with that being a part of this journey, being able to talk to folks about, you know, how, you know, our job working behind the wall really does help to develop us and evolve us into some really wonderful leaders in our respective areas when we decide that we're going to step out and do something more. So it's going great. I love it. And last night, thank you for joining, Anthony. That was great having you on last night's Zoom.
I'm going to tell you something. Not only did I enjoy that, but I do think that maybe me and Connie once a week could do a flyer. And what I mean by do a flyer, maybe Connie can. And I can't do it. And we'll give you a password and a Zoom, and we'll invite a certain amount of people in, because that was the format of the show that Connie was on. She was on a Zoom show where they actually had people, like a live audience, coming through Zoom, and it was a great interaction. And I must tell you, Connie, I was so impressed with the interview. I learned a lot more about you, and you've been on my show for a while, and I did not know the story. Maybe one day we'll share it. When you fell down the stairs when you were pregnant. I've never heard the story before, and I guess it's just, you know, like you said, there's just sometimes there's so much to learn about somebody, and it was a pleasure to really I get to know you on that intimate level. You just did a great interview yesterday. If you guys get a chance, Connie, how could they find that interview if they wanted to check it out?
So I believe it might be posted on YouTube. I would have to get all the details for you and give it to you so you can put it in the show notes.
Okay, that's fine. And then, guys, you heard that. So check the link and you can see her interview. It ran about an hour and a half. But again, you know, she's a supporter of us. And I promise you, anytime Connie has something to say, there's going to be value there. So definitely worth an hour and a half. It actually felt like it was less than that, because that's how much information is just getting put out there. So well done, Connie. I'm glad I was able to sit and enjoy that. I was glad I was able to get a question off too.
Yes, you were the first question.
and what was the first thing I said? Connie, you look beautiful today. Didn't I say that? I just want to I want to make sure the whole world knows that. All right. Hey. And now, guys, we're going to have another gentleman. It's the second time on the show. I love his channel. Very big fan of his channel. He has a channel called Correctional Officer Lifestyle. If you guys get a chance, I know he's getting some traffic that's slowly coming over. If you guys get a chance, at least check out the channel, because any bit of information is good information. That's the key, especially in this profession. So if you're new and you're looking to grab a hold of some information, this is a great way to add to that. And even if you were senior, be open, because we don't know everything. We don't. So anytime we have a chance to learn something, it's worth the travel. It's worth the journey. And I'll tell you something, the journey that I made to Correctional Officer Lifestyle, the YouTube channel from David Smith, well worth the journey for me. So hopefully it's the same for you. But Dave, what's going on? Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, man. This is David Smith, Correctional Officer Lifestyle. Glad to be a part of the discussion, man. I'm enjoying it. I'm looking forward to Russ's video and what we can possibly take away from it.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting. I do want to show Russ's video first. Russ had some very good information that he shared with us, and I want to be able to let you guys see that. But I want to incorporate that in this video and not a separate video, because I want to also kind of feed into what he's got. So now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tear Talks for you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about inmate porters. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. Okay, guys, so bear with me, guys. I'm going to quickly share my screen.
Hey there, everyone. Russ Hamilton here. Anyway, Anthony asked that I just give you guys a little message on inmate porters. And basically, one thing that we have to realize about the whole business of having inmates work for us as porters or whatever is that we put them in a position where they can sometimes be able to breach security, right? And they can do that in a number of different ways. And we don't want that to happen. So I do have a couple of stories just to, really kind of drive this point home to you. But first of all, one thing that these porter positions, these work positions allow them to do, it makes them, able to establish rapport, right? And rapport, it's a two-way street. But they're always on the end of being able to try and use it to manipulate, because that's what the whole point of their existence actually is. So when they're there day in and day out and you become accustomed to them and, you start to build that rapport, then they can look for a way to exploit that, right? And that's exactly what we don't want to have happen. But, with whatever particular staff member that they're with, some staff members are going to be more vulnerable to that than others. But don't ever assume that they can't get there with you, because they can. Just a short list of a few things that you can think of that are not good for inmate porters to be doing is, first of all, they're in a position then to overhear conversations, things we probably don't want them to hear. They're in that position, like I said before, to be able to establish rapport. We don't really want that happening, because they can use that to manipulate. It also puts them in a position where they can assess weak spots in our plan for, maintaining safety and security. I mean, think about that day in and day out. They're maybe in a spot where they can see and know your movements and what you search and what you don't, or find a way to move contraband across that line where they shouldn't be moving it from or to. So, and that's just a little bit. That's just a little bit of the critical thinking skills that you got to start looking toward. You've got to be able to look at it like these inmates look at it and try and figure out how they would get around the security protocols that we have. I'll never forget when I was a very, very young officer in East Block. East Block was divided into two sides, right? You had the Bay side, which was death row, and then you had the yard side, which had general population in it. So on death row, we actually had porters that would come from the general population side over there, and they would move things up and down like food and you know, do a little bit of housekeeping over there. Now, they weren't down on the tiers, but they were still in a position where they could, you know, maybe hand something off to an inmate. I always, you know, really hated the whole process that they had. But one day the lieutenant there, his office was up underneath the tier there on that yard side where the general population was. And he called some of his officers over, and he said, just listen. And you could listen and you could hear like this constant, you know, scraping sound. Shh, shh, shh. And so a couple of the officers got keys and went up there and accessed and took a look around. And they were able to spot these general population guys making shanks inside their cell. Both of these guys happened to be porters. So when you think about that, you know, they could have been easily under the influence of some of these death row inmates. Those shanks could have been destined to be used on staff. We'll probably never know that, of course. But just think about the implications of having a bad policy like that, where we at all had those inmate porters in that position, right? It's something that probably should have never taken place. But we start to get lazy and we start to think, you know, that they're not going to do anything. We're going to pat search them when they're coming in. Yeah, are you searching all of the carts? Do they have access to those food carts that come over all the way from the kitchen? Could they be hanging things on those? All right. We don't have 24 hours a day to, you know, be sitting there thinking these things out, but they sure do. So that's just one of those things where they could have been, you know, trying to get those weapons in there for a purpose. But just another quick little glimpse into inmate porters and what goes on. Very early on in my career, I had a porter that worked for me, and I don't really know if the guy just took a liking to me or if maybe he was trying to get over on me in some way, but he just started talking to me about things that he had done in his career, in his criminal career, that is. And anyway, he was a member of the Nuestra Familia. I mean, he had the real tats and the whole 9 yards and stuff, but he had managed to, you know, make sure that he was in the general population at that point. And he just started telling me, you know, about how to manipulate people. And he told me this story about he was a porter in an area, and he would go into this area and clean every day. And that gave him the ability to what? To establish rapport with this particular secretary. And time went on and time went on, and he got more and more friendly. And he said, and then, you know, he would clean around her. And then he said that, you know, one day, you know, he knelt down to scoop some stuff into the trash, and he took that chance and, you know, placed his hand on her thigh, and she didn't move away. And that's when he knew that he was going to have access to the things he wanted from her, from the sex to the drugs that she ended up smuggling in, and all sorts of things. So this is what we don't want porters for, is to establish that rapport and be able to find that weak link and exploit it and cause problems as far as especially the safety and security goes. So anyway, I know that there's things out there that we do with porters that we have to in order to manage that workload, because we're not going to hire staff to just do those menial tasks. But really, think about what you're doing when you're introducing these porters into situations where they could be breaching that safety and security, where they could be exploiting a staff member that doesn't understand how the game is played. So anyway, I hope you guys will take something away from that. I hope, it'll put you in that position to start looking at this from the critical thinking standpoint. What can possibly go wrong by using an inmate porter? I mean, don't undercut what possibly could happen, because all sorts of bad things, including the death of staff members or other inmates, could be involved. Anyway, this is Russ Hamilton. I'm going to sign off now. Everyone out there, stay safe.
All right. So first off, I thought that was a really great video. But one of the things I definitely want to go back and focus on, by the way, thank you, Russ. I wanted to put it in this video. I didn't want it to be a standalone because I think that video adds foundation to this dialogue. I see us all taking notes. I see Connie there. I took a few notes myself. I want to start off with rapport, because it's something that Russ seemed to mention a lot. So I'll start off with Connie first, because I think rapport is actually what leads to everything else, because rapport could lead to obligation, reliance, being able to pull staff out of their prescribed role, like that connection that makes staff see the inmate not as an inmate, if that makes any sense. Like, I see you more of as a helper or someone maybe I can trust. Again, I hate that word trustee, because that label of trustee is saying what? That I can trust that individual. But Connie, I'm sure you've dealt with porters, orderlies, trustees, inmate that's in a helping position to staff. What do you think about that word rapport? What does that mean to you? And when do you know that rapport has kind of crossed the line?
So I feel like rapport is just not a good word for us to ever use, right? Because they are not our friends. They're not our equals. They're not our colleagues, and it's almost like with rapport, along with that comes this level of familiarity. And, I don't think that we should allow them to become so familiar with us, as well as our routines, as well as the things that we like and don't like. I mean, because most of the time, in my experience, it's been that you encounter these porters that are like really good at their job, right? For me in medical, like we needed people who really understood the protocols, that really understood how to deal with the chemicals and all that wonderful stuff. And, when they become really good, it becomes a situation where they feel that they're indispensable. And so then they try different things because they assume that you're never going to get rid of them because they're so good at what they do. And I think when we think rapport, there is too much familiarity when we use that word. So it's kind of like, yes, I know that's the inmate worker in my unit, or I know that's the inmate worker in medical. And I usually try to keep it that way, because there's been many times where they want to talk to, like, oh, hey, Miss Connie, and they try to make it where there is a rapport. So I think we have to prevent them from being able to even establish a rapport and kind of keep the boundaries where they are.
Yeah, I like that 100%. What's funny is, if you ever read The Downing of a Duck, it starts off where, he makes the area clean for that officer to the point where the officer becomes reliant on him. And that's what kind of opens up the door to this relationship of trust, if you will. And yeah, I do agree. I mean, how do we really define that word rapport? Maybe rapport is just not the right term that we're looking for. Now, Dave, I know you got a chance to listen in onto the dialogue from Russ. Let me just make sure you are unmuted. Are you able to unmute, Dave? Oh, you got it. Yep. So Dave, what's your thoughts on what Russ said when it comes to rapport?
Rapport does lead to a familiarity between the inmate and the staff member, and that's not something that we want to have. One thing that I notice about an inmate when an inmate orderly, that's what we refer to them as orderlies, is getting too familiar with the staff member. They'll start referring to them as a nickname or even by their first name. And that's a big warning sign for me. And I'll do what I can to separate that inmate from his environment to get him away from that staff member because of what I see going on.
I'm going to tell you something hey, Dave, that was a good point that you just brought up. The first name. the first name, when the nickname, the first name, it's like, yeah, but you know what that does? That eliminates the title of officer. So the funny thing is, I always tell people this: if I'm an inmate, the number one thing I want you to do is I don't want you to see yourself. I don't want you to see me as an inmate. That means I don't want you to see yourself as that staff member. So, maybe it's good if we remind inmates that's an officer or that's a social worker or whatever to say, keep the title in play, because the moment the inmate is able to eliminate that part and it goes from, let's say, Officer Gangi to just Gangi, and then somehow, who knows? Hey, Tone, what's up? You just eliminated the official title, which reminds me of what our relationship is about. Hey, Connie, I want to touch on something that you mentioned real quick. I don't want to skip over that again. You talked about reliance, and sometimes you have these porters that are so good at what they do, and sometimes staff makes the mistake of overpraising them, not realizing that when they overpraise these inmates, the inmate will start to see themselves as not easily replaced. Like for me, you're going to do a good job because I tell you to do a good job, and if you don't do a good job, you're removed. That you're not doing me a favor. That's another word. Favor is obligation. Don't let that inmate get that word off. Yeah, Dave knows. So what you do is that I'm not relying on you. So having said that, yeah, it may be a little bit inconvenient for me to fire that porter who is the best at what they do. But having said that, the end game is you're a little too close at this point, and therefore I can always train somebody else. So Connie, can you just touch a little bit on that reliance, especially from a medical perspective with the porters?
So I think for us, one of the things that was really a big deal is that we had a handful that was actually trained to work in the medical unit. So trained to be supportive of, some of the hospice patients. They would train to almost function like a CNA, not quite a CNA, but trained to be able to do some of that work. And the training was an extensive training. So many of them who were in those roles felt that they couldn't be replaced because it took a long time to get the next person sort of trained. So we created a process where we would train, like continuously train, so that we'd always have people who were prepared and ready to step in a role if we needed to get them out. And so the whole thought process of us relying on them. I mean, I think the other thing just to mention is that because some units are short-staffed, there are times, particularly in those areas, where we need it to be cleaned. So we don't have the OSHA and all the other stuff going on. We tend to really depend on them to do that work. And I think for us, it is being able to do it ourselves if they need to be removed. Like, I think that's part of it, right? Like, oh, I'm the administrator, so I'm not going to be doing that. No, I don't mind picking up the mop if I need to. I will clean my own office if I need to. I don't necessarily need you to come and sweep my office or vacuum my office or take out the papers that I probably should be taking out anyway, right? Most of that stuff that we have is confidential. And our reality is that those men and women who do have access to our areas, we have to be prepared to let them go if there is some offense. And I feel that all too often we hesitate and we try to give them the benefit of the doubt when we shouldn't.
Yeah, Connie, what's great about what you said too is that I like what you said about the pressure that you may have to face. Let's say like OSHA, the audit, whatever it is, a supervisor that demands a certain level of cleanliness in the unit to the point where maybe that officer becomes desperate, or maybe that medical worker becomes desperate. And that's where the inmate is able to jump up and then form that, I got you, I'll do you that favor. And then you get that level of obligation where it puts that person like, am I going to have to pay this back? And Dave, you had a reaction before when I said favor, the obligation. I mean, obviously you're familiar with that game. So, how do you see that played out with the porters and the orderlies? Oh, hold on. Hey, let me unmute you. Hold on. I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
All right. Whenever I hear an inmate, porter, or orderly, or whatever they're referred to as in whatever organization, say, can you do me a favor? My answer is always, I don't do favors. And I encourage my staff to get that out there. I don't do favors. I'm not going to do you a favor. I don't want to do you a favor. I will never do you a favor. You are an inmate. I am a staff member. You need to stay in your lane. You need to know your role. The word favor drives me insane in my environment. It irks me to no end. I don't like hearing that come out of an inmate's mouth. Can you do me a favor? No, I cannot.
Yeah, and actually, let's do the reverse perspective, though, too. We don't want the inmate to say that they're doing us a favor, because then it makes it look like, well, wait, am I paying you back? No, you're doing it because I told you to do it. Be careful of those trick words that those inmates use, because that word favor, that's kind of leads into that obligation, and we don't want that. Also, and I'll start with Dave first on this, we have to be very conscious of our environment. And sometimes we don't realize that these porters, these orderlies, they may be out at times when the inmates aren't out, because maybe they may be cleaning up during count, which is usually where, the facility's locked down, but sometimes they're allowed to have the orderlies out to clean, to set up, as long as the count is cleared in that area. Sometimes they're allowed to get some of that cleaning done to set up for whatever that next thing's supposed to happen in that facility at that moment. So now you could have officers that are just not so, or any staff just not so concerned about the environment, and then they're having this dialogue in which these inmates can overhear. Again, that, to me, that's a level of trust right there, that you have these inmates roaming around. Oh, don't worry, that's just Orderly Smith. Well, we should worry, because Orderly Smith, even if Orderly Smith had the best intentions, Orderly Smith can still be pressured by other inmates to, wait, what are they talking about? What's going on? And we'll get to vulnerable inmates being porters. I have that as one of my notes. But let's talk about protecting your information and be careful of what you say, especially when those porters are out. What's your thoughts on that, Dave?
Well, overhearing a conversation, that is a bad thing. I don't think any inmate should be privy to any personal information or any business information that we have going on inside our facilities. So you want to make it as hard as possible for the inmate to hear anything that you got between you and another staff member. And having the situational awareness to know where your orderly is at all times, know that he's too close to you, know that he can hear every single word that's coming out of your mouth. That situational awareness needs to be at the forefront of your mind, because even, like you said, one that has the best of intentions, the other guys in the wing don't have the best of intentions, and threat and intimidation is a real serious factor in a correctional environment. And they'll get the information they want out of that guy about what he learned from you. So you got to protect your information. Knowledge is power.
Yeah, and that personal information opens up the door to a lot of games that can bring about that personal connection. Now, Connie, I want to ask you a question. So same thing, obviously you have orderlies that work in the medical side. I mean, have you ever had it where medical's just a little too comfortable talking, and the orderly's there cleaning up the office, and you're sitting there like, yo, guys, you have an orderly right here, and you're talking about maybe something personal between you, or, I mean, sometimes the orderlies know which staff are dating each other. And I'm just saying.
It becomes a mess, right? I mean, we've had to have many staff meetings just reminding staff that even though you're in the nurses station, you have people around you, even officers, right? Because we are talking about protected health information oftentimes. And so if we don't maintain that situational awareness where we're sharing information even with each other, the one nurse is leaving shift, the other one is coming on, they're doing a report of what's happened over the last tour, even that exchange of information. And you've got the worker who's cleaning, they're mopping the floor. There was something that happened, in one of the rooms, they're cleaning. I think it is absolutely important that we stay mindful that even if it's not our own personal information, particularly as it relates to medical, when we're sharing protected information, we do end up violating someone's HIPAA rights by doing that. So even if it's not just the inmate should not have access to this information, it's understanding that any information the inmate has access to, they can use it in a way that's not so great, right? And in ways that we're not necessarily thinking about until it comes back to bite us.
Yeah, and that's just another good perspective to have. Again, everybody has different priorities. But at the end of the day is we don't want those inmates in those areas, or basically we don't want to be speaking to the point where we're just so comfortable with those inmates around us that we're just giving out our personal information and just like, oh, that's just inmate Smith. Now, before we go into selecting the right porters for the job, and again, that's going to be a constructive dialogue because I have very little notes here, so we'll kind of figure it out along the way. I think us three can really put our heads together and give out some good advice with that. Again, that's what we do here. We don't really prepare anything. But Russ did mention safety and security, and I do agree with that, and I'll tell you why. These porters have a lot more, or some of these orderlies, porters, trustees, whatever, they do get a lot more freedom than obviously the other inmates. They're out at times when the other inmates aren't out, which is when we tend to be ourselves, staff. Like staff looks for those breaks. Sometimes when count happens and after staff takes the count, they may go take a little breather for a second. Not that they leave the unit, but it's our time now. Those are the times when the facility is locked down. It's our time now. So when you have these orderlies out, sometimes they're out when it's not normal time. So they see a lot of what staff does, maybe even something as simple as, how counts get collected, or how the counts being done or, whatever. And then you also have just them, having more access to the facility, as I mentioned, more access to, the inmates in those areas that are not necessarily like in the same cell as them. So I think with the greater access that they have and also just the time that they're out, they can see things that can really help them maneuver around some of the safety and security concerns because they see how we do things more. What's your thoughts on that, Dave, from a safety and security perspective?
The safety and security perspective of choosing the right inmate to be an orderly is one of the biggest factors involved in getting that done. I would rather have an inmate that knows absolutely nothing about the job that he is being given versus somebody that is an expert in the field he is being given, but he's gonna harm the security of the institution in some way, shape, or fashion. I'd rather have an inmate I got to train from ground zero that doesn't have those tendencies than one that does have those tendencies that happens to be really good at what he does. One of the things that we look at as far as safety and security is gang affiliations, security threat individuals and such, because they have the propensity to damage the security of the institution in some way, fashion, or another. It doesn't matter how good they are at the job. I'll train somebody from ground zero.
Right. So, and Connie, real quick, because I think now we can start talking about filtering the jobs and making sure that we do have porters. And again, nothing's 100%. Hopefully the advice that we're going to figure out as we go right now, because we have three good minds here, so I'm sure we can figure it out, is what we feel can help. But again, nothing's 100% because we're not getting the best resumes here. We're getting some real shitty resumes that we have to work with. So real quick, again, so there's different locations, right? There's different job locations. There's different housing unit locations. So I want to tell you one thing right now with porters, because of their accessibility, in some cases they may go from different, to different units depending on what their job is. They are actually in a very good position to transfer contraband. So one of the things that I'm going to look at is, what are the threats and how can these threats be accomplished in my facility? So one thing is weapons, drugs. I don't want that shit traveling around. Usually if I have, if you have, let's say, drugs coming into the facility, you start to identify who those players are. You kind of want to keep them in one area so you can control the flow and start really, getting at them, making it very hard for them to do what they do. But then eventually they're going to start maneuvering and they're going to try to spread it out. So we wind up being spread out, and we want to be actually more controlled. So the porters to us are always a threat because the porters may have access to multiple units or multiple areas where inmates, where they can get stuff and travel with it. So one of the things I'm concerned about, especially is with their behavior inside the facility, is do I have any inmates while they were in the facility that are looking to be porters with institutional drug charges? That means that somewhere along the line, I don't care if they were smoking weed, I don't care if they were the ones distributing it. If you had access to it at one point, you're not getting the job. So I'll go with Connie first, because another thing with hospital porters is you don't want them to have any drug history on their record, not even coming in with a drug history. So is that something that you look at with your porters, Connie?
So we definitely look at that. We also look at what were their prior work experiences and what were their prior offenses while they were in the last time, whatever their previous incarceration behavior was. We tend to look at that as well, because certainly we don't want anyone who's already been caught up in any of the institutional politics, because that only carries over. And particularly for someone who's going to be working in medical, that's pretty much coming into the clinic area where there's so much foot traffic in there. So many inmates funnel through there. And the last thing we need is one that's going to be caught up in something, who's going to be in the midst of, or maybe just the transporter, right? That's maybe the go-between between the one who wants to give something and the one that's passing. And for us, it's really just making sure that we keep eyes on them, particularly because of how heavily trafficked medical is.
Right. And hold on, I'm just closing my notebook. Took some notes here. I like that, Connie, because medical actually is one of the areas where, you lose those drugs, you lose those sharps, that's a concern. That will shut down the whole prison immediately. Right now, you got Suboxone, you got a bunch of stuff there on narcotics that it's not.
Anytime narcotics are involved, we end up with the DEA at the door. So the reality for us is that we make sure that there is no access to the narcotics.
Right now, hey, Dave, real quick, what's your thoughts on, not having inmates with any level of, definitely with any institutional drug charges, but even for, let's say, hospital porters, not having any drug charges at all? What's your thoughts on having them work as porters, either in the hospital or just in general in the facility?
Well, you certainly don't want any inmates with drug charges in medical. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's easy enough to get drugs onto the compound without giving them that close of an access to it. But institutional drug charges, I don't like for an inmate porter or orderly or whatever to have any of that, because if they've already got a history with how to get it and how to pass it and how to transmit it throughout the institution, we're just putting them back in their playground. We're putting them back where they want to be. So I agree with you that they shouldn't have any drug charges, institutional charges for drugs, if they want to be an orderly in the facility. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, that's something where, again, if there's a committee that chooses the jobs, yeah, officers could select, or whoever it is, the area supervisor can select, but it should still go through a committee that really, classification has to be involved, because it's not just about what you know about that individual in the facility. It's also about, what the individual did coming in. You don't want people with sex crimes, aggressive sex crimes, working with as porters in, let's say, a highly populated civilian area, where you have educators or social workers or whatnot. You may not want them to be a porter for a female officer. You don't know, but you want to be able to make sure that you filter these concerns, because at the end, if something does happen, it's hard to say that you didn't catch that, you didn't see that. Well, the inmate was, never got a charge in 10 years, but the inmate was in for aggravated sexual assault. They don't care about their institutional behavior. They're going to go right back to what brought the inmate in. Another concern for my porters is I don't want a porter that is vulnerable. And what I mean by that is a porter that could be bullied by other inmates. Because now if you have an inmate that could be seen as vulnerable, other inmates could manipulate that porter, by threats, just to say, hey, you better get this done or we're going to, take you out or whatever. Is now you got an inmate who is vulnerable, who is going to be passing out contraband, because again, they don't have the ability to stand up for themselves. So a little hint for this is, I'm not really a big fan, as mentioned just now, of having sex offenders Unless I work in a total sex offender facility, that's a little different, guys. That's a totally unique situation. You're put in a situation where you have to, but again, they're among other sex offenders. But I don't want a sex offender to be a porter because they tend to be vulnerable inside a regular facility. So at that point there, inmates could put a little fear on that inmate, and now that inmate is the one that's passing the contraband. What's your thoughts on that, Connie, when it comes to inmates that could be seen as vulnerable becoming porters?
I mean, so vulnerability comes in all shapes and forms, right? And so sometimes it could be a mentally ill patient, not on the spectrum of mentally ill in that they're not functioning well, but someone who's mentally compromised to some extent. You know, you think about, someone who is maybe taking or part of an MAT program, right? Like, you never know as they're interacting with the population, how people will try to leverage whatever they can, how other inmates will try to leverage whatever they can to get the methadone from that particular inmate, right? So I feel like vulnerability doesn't necessarily just have to be the offense. It could be the vulnerability of having access to something else or being otherwise compromised. And certainly, I know that we can't not give them a work assignment, but I feel like there's got to be a way, I think, that we try to support them still doing something productive while they're in there. I know different facilities have different requirements, but even if someone is vulnerable, I know that we still try to get them to be doing something where they can still be productive, even though it might not be working in a very sensitive area.
Right. I mean, there's other jobs, obviously, that are limited in, what the inmate can do, where they can go. I mean, the concern here is with porters is that porters have a little bit more freedom and they kind of have a little bit more interaction. Hey, Dave, just real quick, I actually have another thing I'm just thinking in my head as we filter through these porters. But I just wanted to ask you about vulnerable inmates. I mean, what's your thoughts of, having vulnerable inmates, however it's defined? I chose inmates that were weaker in nature. Connie chose inmates that could be easily manipulated. They may not know they're doing something wrong because they could be limited in their, you want to say intelligence. I don't want to, say anything wrong, but, so they could be manipulating and doing something that they may not realize is wrong. And by the way, that inmate probably won't be charged anyway. So, it's sad to say, but the inmate that's pushing that inmate to do it, there's no loss for that inmate. There's just no loss. But what's your thoughts on vulnerable inmates being porters?
Well, it's kind of a catch-22. You don't want a real strong, aggressive inmate being a porter, but you also don't want one that is subject to being manipulated through coercion and violence. You got to find a good mix there. I kind of like where Connie went with the not necessarily on the mental health spectrum, but still mentally impaired enough that he might not even know that he's doing wrong. That's a dangerous situation. You've got an inmate that at this point doesn't know he's doing anything wrong. The people that are making him do what he's doing know he's doing wrong, but he doesn't even know he's doing anything wrong. That creates a whole new set of dangerous variables that I'd rather not deal with.
Yeah, well said. You know what's funny? As we talk about this, I'm actually picturing myself. Like, if I did have an inmate that was vulnerable, and again, there could be positions where, like, you could have a special needs unit where you have to hire them, but again, they're limited to that special needs unit. I'm talking about porters that really have more of ability to travel. I don't want to put an inmate in that position, actually, I'm thinking of right now. But having said that, if I did, and I was aware of that concern, I'm going to be on that inmate. I'm going to be on that inmate. And I just think that's too much for the staff member to do. There could be other jobs, as I said, that could be offered. But when we talk about porters here, we're talking about inmates that have greater access. And because of that, they become a target by the population. If I know you're a porter and you have access, I need that access. So porters will always be the ones that could be traveling with the contraband because they have the ability to do that. Now, I'm sure there's more, but there's a couple more things I want to cover, and it deals with gangs. This is tough because sometimes we're not going to have that choice. But what I would tend to do is if I could avoid it, I don't want gang members to be my porters. That's not 100%, but sometimes you can't avoid it. But if I can avoid it, if I see that inmate is a gang member, I don't care if they say they no longer are a gang member. It doesn't matter. I don't want them being my porter. I don't want to give them access to bigger or greater areas because it also gives them a chance to bring their people together. They're not loyal to you as a staff member. They're loyal to their group. So at the end of the day, is you're giving this inmate a very good playground to go ahead and, take control of that area. Because again, they're gang members. Their loyalty is not to what we do or who we are. Their loyalty is to, their gang. And, if ever there's a chance you want to pass, drugs or weapons, it would be, it could be someone that's a lower level soldier. Now, the funny thing is, some people have said, well, use the higher level gang members, build that rapport. But again, we talked about rapport. And the thing is, they're not the ones that are going to carry, the weapons or the contraband, the drugs, because they don't want to get written up. They don't want to get charged, so the higher level. Yeah, but you're giving them an area to have an influence in. So I don't agree that, okay, I'm not going to use a soldier and I'm not going to use a higher level gang member. So if I could avoid it at all costs, I'm not using gang members. Now, if that's said and I do have to use them, because let's say I'm working in a gang unit, I'm going to be on point. I mean, I'm going to be as on point as I can be. I'm going to be watching these details every step of the way. And what I will be doing is, that's another thing, guys, reporters. It's sometimes good to rotate them out so they don't build too much of a familiarity, not just with staff, but ability to get around what we do and safety and security. So if I have to work with the gang members, the job's not going to be permanent. They're going to be random, and I'm going to keep on bringing different inmates in from, hopefully different sets, just to keep things moving so they don't get too comfortable. And I would also like to think also is that I would probably do it maybe every 30 days. I mean, that's crazy, but I would probably do it every 30 days, just keep that rotation going. But hey, Dave, I'll have you go first on this. What's your thoughts on the using gang members as porters if you don't have to? That's the key. If you don't have to, would you still select a gang member?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I was part of the gang unit at my institution for a very long time. I've seen the ill effects of using gang members as orderlies. Absolutely not. If I don't absolutely 100% have to, I'm not going to. Period. End of story.
Yeah, I agree. The reason why I wanted to bring that up is because obviously there are some places where you may have to. I mean, these are just the units that you run. But Connie, what's your thoughts on that as well, even from the medical side? I mean, what do you feel about using gang members as orderlies in your area?
We don't want them in our area. I mean, I just feel like there's a certain level of compromise that they present to begin with. And I think that's just an added complexity to medical that we just don't need. Fortunately, you guys are responsible for making that determination. And so from a medical side, we kind of get a pass on having to, really do that scrutiny of their classification or whatever else that we need to consider. But, that is one of those tough decisions. Well, not tough decisions, quite honestly, because it's just not something that it's not an added complexity that we need to the medical environment at all.
Off the top, and I'm sure there's more. So, guys, we do have the comments. So, guys, comment, what you would also consider would be good porters and not good porters. Before we close, we did say people that wouldn't fit to be good porters. And I think on the adverse of that, you kind of figure, okay, well, I'll just take the opposite of that, and they should fit. But if I could give just some advice, I think at the end, and we should have mentioned earlier, is maybe we should rotate those porters more. Don't give them a chance to be too familiar. Make it a job that rotates anywhere from a month, like maybe every 30 days or every 6 months. Don't give them a chance to, get to be too familiar with what's going on. And it also reminds them that, yes, you're replaceable. Now, is that a lot to keep track of? It's not. The detail supervisor can figure out how to do that, forward it to classification, say, hey, there's time is up. I need the next group of porters. But I think that's key for me. So even if you don't get the best of resumes, I'll keep rotating them out. So, you protect yourself, you protect the facility, and you protect that inmate from getting too close, because in the end of the day, they know that no matter how many favors that they do or they think they're doing, or no matter how close me and you are going to become, doesn't matter, because on the 5th of May, you're being, I don't know what the hell made me choose that day, but I don't know where the hell that came from, but on the 5th I'm going to go with it. Hey, wait a second. Is the 5th of May almost 6 months from today? It's close to 7 months. 7 months. But I don't know what the hell when a day came. My birthday's May 3rd, so I should have said May 3rd. I said 5th of May.
Maybe
Makes
you're
no
thinking
sense,
about
but
Cinco de Mayo.
why though?
What are
Why
you
would I
thinking
be
about the holiday?
why out of all the holidays, like why am I thinking of Cinco de Mayo? That is, you're on point, Connie, today. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I'm joking. But anyway, so hey, at the end of the day, you're still going. You're not, because they may even push you when they get too comfortable. Hey, Gange, nope, sorry guys, on the 5th, and I would actually make it institutional policy. So if a supervisor comes up and says, hey, I've seen these inmates here for like the last 8 or 9 months, swap them out. This is policy. Swap them out. But before we go, we have our final thoughts. And I'll start with Connie first. What would you look for in a porter, and do you believe that swapping them out every 3 to 6 months or whatever the time frame is a good idea?
I mean, I would look for someone, it's kind of difficult, right? Because you say I would look for someone honest. Like, okay, well, I don't know that you're going to ever really find that, right? You're going to look for someone who has some level of work ethic, right? Because you want them to have some level of commitment to getting the job done that you're looking to get accomplished. I think the more I think about it is that, we need the porters, yes, but they are a major source of vulnerability for us. I think they make us vulnerable. If in fact we allow them to stay in these roles for more than 30 or 60 days, I think it's for us to understand that they have learned the routines of those areas. And once they've learned those routines, they can create the vulnerability if there isn't one there already. And, it would be in our best interest to actually swap them out because of what they've learned in those areas that they've been in for any extended period of time.
I agree. And hey, Dave, just out of curiosity, what's your thoughts on, good porters, or any advice on, kind of how to maintain that safety and security when dealing with porters?
I actually want the loner. I want the inmate that sits on his bunk and reads when he's in the housing unit. He's not overly engaged with the rest of the inmate population. He's to himself. He's the loner. That's the one I want. And you absolutely have to rotate them out. If you let one get too familiar with a staff member, they're going to break the staff member down and you're going to lose that one. So I agree that they need to be rotated.
Right. And hey, guys, obviously we're wrapping it up. If I could give advice, have a committee that's made up of classification, the different jobs that would hire. You could have a representative like the detail supervisors there, custody. And then, through that panel, you could filter through and try to be the best, but look at everything. I mean, it's not just about what they've done in the facility, but what brought them in. And then just, hopefully you guys, by looking at it together, can filter out through the different perspectives and try your best to get somebody good. But again, the resumes we have, they're just not the best. And there really isn't going to be no procedure. There's nothing we can tell you today. It's going to be 100% that you take this person and they're not going to be a problem. But just be aware of the dangers, that they have access to a lot more. People tend to build that rapport, which you don't want, that obligation, just the reliance on a porter. I still feel the best bet here out of this whole dialogue, as we discovered, is that rotation. Eliminate that inmate's chance to, build that level of familiarity. And then also maybe facilities should make that into policy. I believe the rotation in and out of jobs is the best advice that we could give you at this point that could alleviate some. But again, nothing's 100%. Hey, Dave, you have anything you want to say in closing, sir?
Just Thanks for having me, man. This was a fun discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. I think the people in corrections can take a lot from it, and I appreciate you having me. As always, check out my channel, Correctional Officer Lifestyle. Got some good info for you.
Again, I'm a big fan of you, Dave. And, Dave, thank you for your service. You got a lot of time in. You're a supervisor. You're leading the way by example. You're going home and on your own time, you're just banging out these videos that have these great nuggets of information. And, that takes a lot because it's not just about what you do in the profession when you're there. But for some reason, it doesn't leave you when you get home, and you still are able to balance family with just being able to help your other family behind the wall. And I think that's a very good, noble effort. And I do wish your channel the best success. And I'm obviously going to have you on again. And by the way, Dave, I am annoying. You'll see. Connie, yeah, okay, Connie, you shook your head even before I said annoying. You already, but I am. And listen, and Connie will tell you this, and she'll agree. My shows are always planned. I call you in enough time. No, not at all, Connie.
No.
Really?
No. I happen to have information because we speak more often than not. But usually it'll start out with, this is what we're going to talk about today. And by the time the end of the evening comes, we're talking about something totally different.
Oh, yeah.
So we can't even go with whatever the beginning of the conversation was, because by the time we get to the end of it, we're already off to the races somewhere else.
Oh, what Connie hasn't realized too is sometimes, like, Connie, I have a show idea and we're talking back and forth, and she doesn't realize I recorded the whole thing and I post it up. Thanks, Con. I need a show. You know what I mean? Yeah, so I didn't even do my hair. Like, Connie. Oh, wait, hold on, Connie. Before your closing thoughts, I think you know where I'm going with this. So I think you know where I'm going with this. So wait a second, guys. And I'm sure people are going to sign off at this point, but maybe there's that one viewer that needs to know this. So when we watched the show with you yesterday, my wife comes downstairs. She goes, "Wow, Connie looks beautiful." I was like, "Yeah, she does. She's all made up." And I was like, "Wow." And then she goes, "She doesn't look like that for Tear Talk." I was like, "You know what, honey? She doesn't. Where's the lipstick for us, Connie? Where's the eyeshadow for us?"
Oh, God. So look at this. That show started at 6:45. Well, 7 o'clock. We started a show at 9 o'clock at night. There is no makeup, hair done, all that crazy stuff at this hour of the night on a Friday night, no less.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do then? I'm going to make sure we start early. I'll call you in about 3 a.m. today. I want you to be ready. I want you to be beautiful. No, I'm joking. All right. Hey, Connie, you have anything you'd like to say in closing? And by the way, again, congratulations on the great talk.
Thank you. I just want to say to people, just don't let your guard down. I think that all too often we do get overly familiar with the porters, and we do forget that they're even around. When they are around, we cannot be so, I don't want to say complacent, but I think sometimes that's what it is, that we are just very familiar, and we do let our guards down, and we leave ourselves open to situations that could be avoided. So don't let your guard down.
I'm glad you said complacent. We forgot to bring up that word. That was very good. Everything comes full circle. Complacency, again, the rotation out. Guys, I thought it was a great show. I'm sure there's some stuff we could talk about as you guys put the comments in, just to kind of maybe see if this is something that we could explore. Again, I would like to actually, for some reason, maybe get a classification person on here just to kind of let them tell you what the process is, because, guys, each person has to get filtered, and it's not that easy. You got to look for the littlest of things, the littlest things that pose a threat. And sometimes that's not just what's surface. Sometimes you have to dig into a file and find stuff. Some of these files could be huge. I mean, just literally huge. So kudos for the people that do spend the time going through those files and coming up with those small things that could pose a threat. Because at the end of the day, it's liability, because somebody will find that, and shit happens and shit hits the fan. They're going to point to that little thing, and we have to do our best to make sure we uncover those little things. So as always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. As always, guys, stay safe.